Hello, everyone. Today's topic is money. And money is, after all, the only reason, probably the only reason, why we write project proposals. During my 20 years, I have never met anyone who would be writing project proposal just for fun. So if you are in the situation like majority of us that you have to apply for funding, I highly recommend you to understand things around money. And honestly, there are not that many of them, but knowing about them and understanding, well, the options, the opportunities and limits they bring together with your budget and with your money will help you to avoid lots of problems, troubles, and risks, and also will give you some flexibility. So in today's video, I'm going to give you some basic introduction in relation to money. And I know you might think, wow, basic introduction, I'm not going to listen to it. But believe me, this is introduction that will explain you how the system works. And therefore, you will be able to better grasp what is happening with money in your own project proposal and later while you are going to implement your project and spend this money. So without further ado and long introduction, let's go on the way and let's talk about money in the project. So let me share the presentation. So as you see, I'm not going today to cover everything from plan to expenditure, but the point is that these basic principles will help you to plan your project budget in order to eliminate problems when you are going to spend them. So during the expenditure period, so when your project is being implemented. And yeah, I understand we all need to know lots of things. You are researchers, so your research topic is already challenging. But please, understanding money is really important, particularly these days when you probably already face the fact that researchers are more and more pushed to write project proposals to gain additional budget because universities, research institute at the moment, most of them struggle with money. So people are being asked more and more to apply for funding, which is why you need to understand basic things about money. While this is not going to be some kind of in-depth training in financial management, I will tell you when to go to experts and what it is that you need to know in order to know when to go to experts. So before you can start to plan your project budget, you need to understand the work breakdown structure and project management triangle. You will definitely see, or with high probability, in all templates, project proposal templates, you will come across some part that will look like this work breakdown structure, whatever they call it. And if you watched my previous video, you might remember that I said be careful. Sometimes for the same concept, funding agencies use different names, different words. So I will show you in a while how it looks like. The project management triangle, you will never hear this word, but you need to understand that project management triangle is always about scope, time, and money. So these three characteristics that relate to your project. And whenever you start to plan your project proposal, you need to understand any limitations in relation to these three principles or these three parts of project management triangle, because this is going to tell you what is the space, your maneuvering space for your project solution. And it is exactly just like any kind of strategic game. You need to understand the surroundings, the space where you are going to have the battle. So this is a kind of battle for money. And in the game, you are not surprised that you need to work out some kind of strategy. And yet, when it comes to project proposal writing and fighting to get money for your research, people think it works differently. It does not. Only to understand the rules of the game may sometimes be, well, a little bit more challenging. And that's again the reason why it is really good if you have really good project support people, because they can help you with the games of, with the rules of this game. But if you don't have them, you can still help yourself. Okay, so let's have a look. So this is the work breakdown structure. Some of you who are more experienced might have seen this scheme before. Well, this is actually when your thoughts about how you are going to implement your project to achieve your goals, to achieve your objectives. And you already know what tasks need to be performed. And you might remember from my video on project management, the difference between work packages, processes, and tasks. Well, anyway, the point is that you need to get with your project planning at such level that you can really imagine how long it will take to perform the particular task. Most of the times you will get to the detail of weeks or days. And the reason why you have to do this, because you really have to imagine a person performing the work, what he or she will need to perform the work, and so on. I'm going to talk about this in details in the next video. Well, why I need to understand this? Because as I said just now, from this, I can read what kind of and how much money I will need. Well, as you see, I repeat again this what concept of project management triangle, just always to remind you that you must get as much information as possible when it comes to whatever qualities your funding agency adds to the project cost. So they tell you what it is that you can finance from their money. They also tell you what kind of activities you can finance with their money. And they also may tell you about some kind of limitations. Plus, when it comes to money, you need to understand that there are some limitations, time limitations related to the type of money. I'm referring now mainly to tenders or perhaps hiring people, because it takes a certain amount of time before you can actually realize the purchase. So always I need to get as much information as possible when it comes to project costs. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of overview or details on where to get this information, how to get it, and how to work with it. In the next videos, we are going to apply it in practice in the project planning. So I'm returning again to my favorite definition, not that I'm sleeping with this definition under my pillow, but as I said, this one sentence summarizes absolutely everything about project writing. So as you see here, I have highlighted the end of the sentence where they talk about that your project have to be in tune with specific requirements and constraints related to costs and resources. And this, again, is something that is going to be defined both by funding agency and your position with an institution with which you are going to apply for funding, because it will be different if you apply for funding with university. It will be different if you apply for funding from a private institute. It will be different if you apply for funding as the head of the department or as, I don't know, rector or dean, compared to the situation if you are just a PhD student. And I will again explain all this in some later videos. So really, if you are a newcomer, I highly recommend this. Not that, it's too much fun, but this is really important. And honestly, as I told you, I myself applied for a lot of project funding with many project proposals, and I always did it just because I wanted to implement some work, not because it would be fun to apply for funding. Definitely not. But once you get the money, you really need to guarantee for yourself as much flexibility as possible, because I mentioned this in the video on project management. Things are going to be different compared to your project plan. So it is important that you don't create yourself additional constraints, additional limitations, just because you didn't plan your project budget flexible enough in order to give you space. So, as I said, whenever we start to think about project, we come from this kind of chaotic stage when we organize our thoughts together with colleagues and other project members. So once we kind of organize our ideas on how we want to achieve some kind of objective and why we decided to do it in this way, you will end up with the work breakdown structure. But whatever you plan, you always or never mustn't forget that it is still just, a foresight. You work this solution based on you work it out based on lots of uncertainties and lack of information. So always bear in mind that you need to keep as much space as possible. And this refers to money as well. So that's the reason why I always say that your objective when it comes to planning your project is both to have relevant resources. So this is the reason why I told you, you plan your costs once I know about my work breakdown structure in details. Once I know what kind of tasks I want to perform, how many people are going to be involved, how long, for example, the experiments will take, and so on and so on and so on. And this so on will be covered in future video. But you also, and that this is your task at the beginning, you need to learn absolutely everything about where is flexibility in your proposed project budget, because with high probability, you will need to change something. So be aware of what is possible to change. For example, quite frequently, they tell you that you mustn't, during the project implementation, increase your personnel costs. And now imagine that you need more people. You still have money because you saved money on traveling, for example, but because that's the rule, you can't increase the personnel cost. Sorry, you just can't hire more people. And knowing this, as I said, every project is just an estimation. So it's better to be a little bit more generous with personal resources, because, okay, I can always take money from the budget on personal resources and transfer it, for example, to traveling budget, but I can't do it the other way around. So still you will ask for the same amount of money, only you decide for slightly different structure. So you see, just amount of the money would be still the same, but the logic, how you structure your project budget, might already help you a lot and might help you with the flexibility. And of course, when you plan your project budget, you need to learn where are possible risks. And I could tell you lots of stories how to avoid risks, and how even if you try to avoid risks here and there, you get into the situation which you simply didn't expect. But be careful, you don't want to do anything risky with project money, because number one, most of the times it's public money. So it is going to be controlled, heavily controlled, what you did with the money. Plus, even if you are a researcher or academic or student, you still have financial responsibility, not for the whole amount of money, but, well, for example, in the Czech Republic, if you cause some financial troubles to your institution that employs you, you can pay up to, I think, 4 times, not certain, but it used to be 4 times of your month income. So this is, again, something that you really want to avoid. So whenever you come across something that might sound risky, just avoid it. And I will talk about risks related to money, as I said, in the next videos. So what's next? Yeah, so this is the typical budget structure. If you have never seen a project, most of the times you will see that they allow you to ask money for personal costs, travel costs. They will tell you if it's possible to purchase equipment or not. They will also tell you in the call for proposals whether you can purchase consumables or whether you can you have to buy consumables from your indirect costs. And I'm going to, I can cover it actually at the moment. So I will repeat this as well. So our intention when we write project proposals is most of the times to get as much expenditures into so-called direct costs. To explain it in easy way, direct costs mean that you have some kind of receipt or invoice based on which you can see what was purchased, and that you can really explain how you needed that item for your project. But particularly with things like cartridges, papers, well, consumables. Sometimes they tell you, well, you can't put this into direct cost, sorry. And you have to purchase everything, all these items from so-called indirect. These indirect costs are always counted as percentage of your direct costs. So again, if I can purchase my consumables as direct costs, that means that I still, for example, I buy ink for 1,000 euros in total in my project. And if I use this, if I'm able to declare this expenditure as a direct cost, it means that from these 1,000 euros, I still might get, for example, 20% as an indirect cost, simply for things to pay for things which I can't directly prove I need them for my project. These are most of the times things like electricity, warmth, water, work of people in, for example, accounting department. You need their work. You wouldn't get your salary without them, or the invoice is paid. But still, well, they are not sitting there and playing it like chess. Now I'm working on the invoice for this project, and now I'm working for the invoice for that project. It doesn't work like that. So expenditures related to services like these are always somehow included in the indirect cost. So the logic is that you need to get as much as possible into the direct cost, so that this sum you will later get as indirect cost will be, as flexible as I would say, as empty and flexible for you as possible. And quite frequently here, please be careful. This is at least practice in the Czech Republic. If you work at the university, the management, the headquarters, rector and his office, there is always logic that they take some money from projects to support these administrative departments, just like I mentioned, the accounting departments and so on. So sometimes you already have some kind of internal directive that tell you that from every project, for example, all indirect costs have to be transferred for, to cover the expenditures of these departments, or they tell you some kind of percentage you have to send them from every project. So this is again a piece of news or information you need to work out at your local level. But be aware of this, because some people get surprised. Suddenly they're happy, I got my project, I got my project, I have to buy all the inks from indirect costs because that's the rule. And you didn't know that you have to give all the indirect costs to, administrative departments. So then you might be surprised that you simply don't have money for certain activities in your projects. So this is, again, the reason why you need to understand. And by the way, you don't have to remember this, because every program has it slightly different. So what you must do all the time, just read financial guides for applicants. These are usually not that long, and they tell you what you include in the direct costs, what you include in the indirect costs. Sometimes there used to be rules where they even told you that salaries of certain people working on a project can't be in direct costs, and that you have to put them in indirect. But as I said, this is always written, and you have this information at your disposal once the call for proposals is open. And of course, they are relevant to the program you choose. So if you, by any chance, would like to read this in advance, you can always get this information from the program you are interested in. But in all cases, whenever the call for proposals is open, these materials will be there, and definitely read them. If you don't read them, you will make mistakes, and it will be your fault if you later have to struggle with your project money. So to return to the typical structure of project budget. So I mentioned consumables. Sometimes you can or can't purchase services. And be careful with services, because these are most of the times regulated by law, and particularly if you work at universities, and they might mean that you somehow would have to be involved in tenders. So services be careful about this. I will talk about it. And overheads, that's again a chapter which refers to costs like salaries of people working in accounting department. So it's a bit like indirect costs. So overheads or indirect costs might be again used for the same concept. And for those overheads or indirect costs, whatever the call for proposal will call them, you will always get some kind of percentage from direct costs. So rule that you need to remember, try to get as much money as possible into direct costs, because then of course you will have more flexibility in your budget for indirect costs or overheads, whatever you call it. Yeah, so that's one recommendation. I could give you more, but then, you know, the video would be again never ending. So what gives limits to your budget? So number one, I have already mentioned the funding authority. Easy thing, they always write everything down. So whatever is written is valid at the moment. There might be changes, so never ever enter a new call for proposals, even if you applied before, without checking financial guidelines, because they might change. Small thing, you never know, and it might be a problem for you in the future. So always check whether the financial rules are either the same as you remember them, or whatever program you have, a new one. This is the key. We write project proposals because we want money. So please be aware of the fact that we need to get as much information as possible about money. So the next part of your, of limitations related to the budget is the organization you work with. There might be certain internal directives, particularly if you work at university, that tell you, for example, who can or can't hire people. There might be some official procedures for certain things like now hiring people or organizing tenders and so on. So just understanding how it works at your institutional level, it will again help you to avoid certain solutions that would be too costly, too timely, too complicated, and force you, once you plan your project proposal, to choose such way towards your objective that is going to be the most, flexible and comfortable for your situation. You need this at the very beginning, because as I said, there will be so many changes on the way, on the go, once you start to implement your project. So, you already at the beginning need to try to be, as I don't know, flexible as possible with your idea that you introduce to your evaluators. Well, okay, so let's return back to the limits. Then it is you and your position. What does it mean? Well, just imagine if I'm a PhD student. Ask yourself, okay, now I plan my project, but practically, what does it mean if I'm going to, for example, buy a computer for my project? Can I just go to the shop, buy a computer with my money, and someone else is going to pay it to me, or what? So always imagine these, whenever you are going to spend some money in project, how technically you are going to do it, because in future with your project, you will do it. So the question is, how? Can you, as a PhD student, for example, hire new people in your project? Can you do it? Probably no. If yes, well, then lucky you. Well, for example, I was a PhD student and I could hire people because at the same time, I was also employed at the position of head of the department. So based on my employment or the position within the organization, I could hire new people, even though I was a PhD student. But at the university where I was a PhD student, I couldn't hire anyone because I didn't have any official power within the organizational structure. So as you see, I'm touching a bit things from management, but I think you have heard these concepts before. So you need to be entitled in the frame of the organizational structure to do something, to perform certain tasks. And if you don't have this power, just my example with PhD students, well, then who has? If you need to hire new people for your project, are you in good terms with this person? Will it be easy for you to hire someone new? So all these questions you need to ask yourself when it comes to your position within the institution and your possible future spending the project budget. And the next limitation is, of course, given by law. And there are not that many things you need to know from law. You will always have people from accounting department that know all the laws related to accounting. But there are going to be a couple of principles you need to be aware of. And I'm going to mention these when I'm going to discuss specific subsection of project budget in details. So let's go further and look again at the funding authority and explain the limits they give us and in what kind of documents I can find them. So as I told you, they write everything down. You don't have to remember anything. Everything is written by the funding authority. When I talk about funding authority, so it's the grant agency where you apply for money. So most of the times, all the time, you get guide for applicants, and there they tell you what they expect from you, what kind of money you can get from them, and what are the conditions that you have to fulfill in order they really would give you the money. So as I said, they will tell you what kind of activities you can finance and what kind of types of expenditures you can have within the project they are going to finance. But most of the times, these guides for applicants just tell you what is possible. But as I told you, it is important to imagine how you are going really to spend this money. And this is the reason why I always recommend also check any kind of document that is available for people who are going to implement the project. It might be, well, guide for implementation, sometimes it is called. It might be something like draft agreement where they talk about practicalities related to the expenditure and how you are going to prove that everything was done in accordance with the rules they set in their documentation. Because sometimes you might see that, for example, to prove something might be too complicated compared to the benefit you would have if you had this money in your budget. So just again, to be specific, for example, there used to be some call for proposals in the Czech Republic where you could apply for money to give away to your to attendees of your courses. So just imagine you as PhD student, for example, could come to me, to Liberec, to my trainings, and I could give you money for accommodation, for travel, and I could even cover to your employer the salary for the day that you spend on the training. Sounds wonderful, but then again, you know, there you always have to have some kind of warning lights in your mind. So what I always did, okay, I thought, well, sounds good, but what does it mean in practice? I, as an institution, I simply can't give away money to someone. There would have to be lots of official documents based on which I could prove to the financial authority that it was this particular person that really traveled by train or bus. Well, you would have to prove where they were accommodated and so on and so on. And just imagine, how would you prove how much money the employer paid to this person to come to your training? So when you imagine all this, well, of course, you might think it's reasonable in your situation, then do it. But if you think, wow, so much work related just to proving how much money I would like to ask for this one person, and is it really worth all this effort or not? So what my logic was, okay, if I'm going to provide someone with excellent trainings for free, then please let him at least arrange his all travel costs and accommodation and whatever kind of arrangements these people had with their employees. That was my logic. I don't say it was good or right, well, but I knew what kind of the size of my team and the energy where we want to focus our energy. So we thought, okay, we are not going to do this. So you see already, just understanding how money in your project would work will navigate you towards certain kind of solutions when it comes to your work breakdown structure and the strategy, overall strategy. Yeah, so when it comes back to the funding authority telling you what you can or can't spend or buy in your project, they will always talk about something called eligibility criteria. Eligibility meaning, well, this money, this type of expenditure is going to be eligible for funding. So this is important word, something is eligible for funding, because sometimes you might have more project costs, no problem from the point of view of funding authority, but they're not going to pay it, you pay it yourself. So you need to have only such expenditures that are going to be eligible. So always search for what makes your project costs eligible. It is always written in the guides for applicants or the guides for implementation. When it comes to restraints related or regulated by law, here I would highlight just a couple of things. So number one, always be careful about taxes. Most of the public authorities that finance research are not that happy to finance VAT. So if they don't give you money for VAT, the question is, who will? Because just again, imagine the situation with the computer. You go somewhere, you buy the computer, but they will sell it with the VAT, meaning that you take your 1,000 euros, you pay for the computer. This seller takes part from these 1,000 euros, which is VAT, and send it to government. But, well, normally, if your institution is also VAT payer, they can kind of, there's kind of easy mathematics because they also pay to the government all the VAT, or the will ask money to return money in case, there is some kind of disbalance. So I'm not going to go into details of this, but VAT is a problem. If they don't cover the VAT in the project, you have a problem. The next thing might relate to customs. They are very often called as ineligible costs. So again, if you purchase, for example, some equipment abroad outside of your country, there will be some customs and sometimes really high amount of money paid for customs. So the question is, who will pay this amount of money? And again, it is important to solve this problem before I apply for funding. Well, it can be paid by your university or research institute, but just have this agreement with your management before you go and apply for funding, because otherwise you could be, well, unpleasantly surprised if they simply don't pay this. Well, the next thing that is related by law are tenders. So whenever tenders are related by law, and these are usually regulated by amount of money you want to spend, think about the fact that there are going to be time limitations and quite a big risk whether you really get what you want to get or not. We'll talk about this later. And social and health insurance, that's a big part of personal costs. Again, we'll cover it in detail, but never ever forget, whenever you write a project proposal and you will employ someone in the frame of your project, you will somehow have to cover social and health insurances. In every country, it is slightly different. So if you are going to enter the area of international projects, just be ready for the fact that it might work across the borders different than it works in your own country. Again, I will cover it in detail. Then we have a couple of things that we need to know from accounting law. And I would say here the most important thing is to distinguish between investments and non-investments, because even this computer thing, for example, in the Czech Republic, might be seen as investment or non-investment expenditure just based on the price. So for example, if I buy a computer in the Czech Republic, I'm now going to talk in Czech crowns. So if the computer, for example, costs 41,000 crowns, it is already investment, and it means that I can get into my project costs only the part of this equipment that equals the depreciation rate, which is something, depreciation, that you will be told in the accounting department. But what you must remember that whenever I make investments, I just can't take the whole sum I paid for this computer and ask the funding authority to pay back as eligible cost. They will only pay you the part that is related to the time that you use this computer in your project. Okay, so this is in the Czech Republic regulated by amount of money you pay for the thing. It's not defined by type of expenditures. And again, I will talk about this when I will be covering the budget structure. And then the labor law, because that one also tell you a lot when it comes to employing people and paying people. And it will be a bit complicated. And this is the reason why I will dedicate one separate video to talking about money for people. Because once you employ people, they have, based on the labor law that is valid in your country, they might have space for taking holidays, being sick, and expenditures for all these situations can or can't be covered as eligible costs. So it will become a little bit more complicated for you to estimate or, well, report project money for people. So again, a bit more details later. Well, whenever you check for details related to project funding, you will see these characteristics on the side of funding authority. They will always tell you what is eligible. They will most of the times tell you how you will verify these expenditures. It will always have to be related to projects. So be ready for the fact that if you buy something that you don't use only for the project, well, you might get some kind of control and you might have problems. So be really careful. The logic in this is that no funding authority wants to finance something, some kind of bonus, which is not related to the project solution they are purchasing from you by means of this project. Well, and the last characteristics that always and every funding authority will ask for that you are going to spend the money according to the local law. But again, for this, you have the support departments and they will help you with that. Well, before I will finish this introduction, I still should talk about a couple of specific project costs, which are most of the times related to projects financed by public authorities such as European Commission or ministries or all kind of agencies that were established by these public bodies. And these specific cost categories of costs are, as you see, costs for management, and sometimes these might be really high. So again, imagine that the project has to keep running and someone has to hire people, someone has to, well, pay the salaries. So ask yourself, who is going to do it? Do I have money for these people or do I need to include them in the project? So whenever money for managerial costs are eligible, so again, try to count how much money you need for that. Sometimes you can ask the funding authority for money, for example, for education. And when it comes to public funds, very often they will ask you for dissemination, communication, and exploitation activities. I think I will cover these three in a separate video because there's quite confusion about these three concepts. But the point is that the logic is whenever the funding authority wants something from you, they will give you money for that. So to be specific, open access articles. Whenever they ask you for open access articles, you mustn't forget that you have to pay for this open access. You need to know how much money. Quite frequently, it is, for example, 3,000 euros. That's a lot. So if you forget when you plan your project budget about these 3,000 euros, and yet you declare among your project outputs this scientific paper that is going to be published under open access regime, then, well, that's the obligation. And the funding authority, funding agency is not going to ask you, oh, please, didn't you forget about these 3,000 euros? They just think you are a grown-up person, grown-up responsible person, and you know what you are doing. So if you tell me you don't need money, probably you have different budget. Well, great. Pay it from your money, and we are looking forward to your open access article. So be careful. Well, as I have already said, how to estimate the budget, the crucial key to this is your work breakdown structure, because from your work breakdown structure, you create something that is called cost breakdown structure. And logically, these two terms sound quite similar, and they sound quite similar because you kind of read your costs based on your work breakdown structure. So to every task, to every work package, you are able to count how much money you need in order to implement the task or the work package. Sometimes you might face the situation that the funding authority, funding agency, offers you lump sums. That's, for example, very characteristic or typical for fellowship programs. They tell you, okay, well, if you have, for example, postdoctoral fellowship, we give you money for your salary, we give you money for your research, we give you money for your training, we give money to your host institution for having you. And these amounts of money are being expressed in the form of lump sum. That sounds so wonderfully easy. So I just count how many months I'm going to be somewhere and I have my amount of money. But the problem is that you now need to take this amount of money and look at it and just see whether the solution you propose is relevant to the money you will have available. Some experiments are expensive. So the question is, will you have enough money for what you propose in your project? So you do it a little bit the other way around. You know how much money you have available. And based on this, so again, I'm returning back to the project management triangle. You know what is your constraint in terms of money. And then remember the quality inside of this all. It regulates the quality you can offer, because if I don't have enough money, either I need to get more from the host institution, and if the host institution is not going to give me more money in order to design my project with higher quality, I just need to reduce the quality demands on my own research work, because simply I don't have enough money. So this is how quality refers to all these three aspects of project management triangle. Okay, I have already mentioned the restraints or the limitations related to the situation you have in your working life. So if I have no power in the organizational structure, I need to understand who has the power to hire people, organize teams, and so on. And either he's member of my project team, or I just need to understand how I will collaborate with these people. So for example, PhD student with my boss, once the project implementation is going to start. So how we are going practically to do the thing with hiring people, purchasing equipment, or whatever. Okay. So I already have given this example. So as you see, this is typical me. I have some structure and I keep on talking. Well, when it comes to the limits coming from your institutions, well, for this, I think the best is just to listen to your colleagues, how they deal with situations, and you will learn a lot from this. But if you have something specific that you have none of your colleagues have experienced before, then I would really check with internal directives if you work at a university, or simply go to accounting department and talk it over, the whole situation, before you suggest something in your project that will be difficult to implement. Well, and after you understand all these limits, then you can start to plan. So what happens quite frequently, you have idea, you create your work breakdown structure, you see what kind of money you need for the solution you created, and suddenly you see sometimes that your idea was too expensive. So it means that you just have to rearrange your thoughts, change the strategy a bit, compromise a bit on the quality, because sometimes, as I said, sometimes you might perform 100 experiments, but you might also get good results on 80 experiments, which means that you are going to save some money. So it's a kind of creative game when you plan your project budget. Yeah. And well, you can do this creative work only if you understand your limits, because once you have the limits, you know what is the space for maneuvering. Wow. And I thought that I would be shorter, but probably I think it is again about 40 minutes. I'm really hoping for 20 minutes, but well, these topics are so challenging and I still haven't worked out how to shorten them. Yeah, I will find out some way. But I thought, again, I'm going to record this one, probably maybe later I will re-record, make it shorter. I'm also, as I told you, well, this is my own project. I'm trying to figure out how to provide training on YouTube. So, well, I'm also trying to learn about strategies, but at the same time, I have a lot of things going on in my personal life. Yeah, so, and this is the kind of voluntary activity, so I need to find a balance, and the projects are always about balance. So I wanted to make this one public because you might be in the situation that you start to think about project finances, you are a little bit lost in it. So maybe I helped you, hopefully I try to. But yeah, really, I think I'm not going to be happy with the product as always, so I might later re-record, but at least there is something available if you are lost and have no one to help you. And feel free if you have questions, there is the comment section. So it's the best. This is the thing I always loved about trainings and about workshops, because we could have directly discussions about what is bothering you, what is the problem you face when it comes to project application or project writing or project implementation or whatever. So anyway, by the way, this was an accident, my pullover and his pullover. But what is not an accident is that we both are going on a holiday from this Saturday. So this is actually the reason why I wanted to record something before I go away. So thank you very much if you managed so far, and looking forward to see you in some other videos. Well, next time, we are preparing some interviews already with Katka, so I'm really looking forward to those. And I'm so happy because, as I said, whomever I asked to share experiences with projects, everyone is willing to help and support early stage researchers and young generation of researchers when it comes to these transferable and soft skills, and helping them to become better in their, or more advanced in their career. So wonderful future, and hopefully we will manage. So thank you very much for your attention, and see you some other time. Bye.